Yeah, under 100 bucks. It's kind of funny. I was talking to somebody this week. So we're in the middle of a series called The Rich Life, and so we're really talking about finances over the next few weeks. And so, I'll give you a quick disclaimer. If you've been around church before, many people have heard pastors talk about finances, and you just feel awkward at the end. Anybody ever been in one of those sermons before? Like by the end of it, some of you are like, "Last week, that was great, thanks." I'm just kidding. You just feel awkward at the end of it. You're just like, "Oh, I feel manipulated," or those kinds of things. So I'm gonna tell you a couple of disclaimers, like right out the gate. Number one, I'm not trying to get your money. I'm really not. So that's not it. Number two, I think when we talk about this, it's an important subject because it kind of is a part of everybody's life, right? This is part of it. I was talking to somebody this week, and they were talking about purchases that they made. This is how the question came about in part. I was where's my friend Mal? I don't know if Malachi's in here, but I asked Malachi every once in a while, I was like, "We got any good questions around this?" And then yesterday he gave me this question. And then so I was talking to a few people after we talked about it. And the list of things that we buy under $100 without even thinking about it is just massive. And I was thinking about this in our family. If it's under $100, a lot of times I'm just like, yeah, you know what I mean? Go for it. You know, my son had these, I think I told you a few weeks ago, he wanted these football gloves. Do we play football? We do not. But we outside, we play them. And they had some for like $60 for 7-year-olds, $70. And then they had some for like $20 that had Ohio State. And I was like, "Ohio State, buddy?" And he's like, "Absolutely." So we bought this $20. But I was like, those things accumulate over and over again. And a lot of times, I don't know about you, I don't think about it. We have a budget. We think about those things for sure. But it's easy to think about those things. When I was younger, and I told you this last week, there was a season of my life where I was not good with money at all in my early 20s. And I didn't come up in a home where we talked about it a lot. So I didn't we talked about it, but I didn't learn about it a lot. And so as we got through it, there was a season of my life where money made me miserable. And it wasn't even how much I made. But I said this last week, and I'll give you a quick recap. We said money should never make you miserable. If money is making you miserable, right, there's something going on in you, or there's something going on with how you're managing it, or there's an income thing, right? Money shouldn't make you miserable. And then we said this last week, and I'll give you a quick recap. The reason that we're talking about this in church, why are we talking about this in church? And I'll just tell you as bluntly as I can, we want something for you. We don't simply want something from you, right? And that sounds like, oh, that's so cute. That's a catchy phrase, but that's actually true. I'm not just trying to get something from you. In fact, that feels as nauseating to me as it does you. I've sat in those services. There's one time, I think I can say it. Yeah, we're not posting at 9 o'clock, so I'll tell you this. One time I sat in a service, and the guy was speaking, and in a room full of people, and I got so frustrated, I raised my hand because I had a question for him about it. He didn't call on me, but that's okay. So I just, there's a piece of me that's like, it bothers me like it bothers you, and so I'll tell you, that's not our end goal. In fact, I told you this last week. There's not a big ask coming at the end of this either. There's really not. Even around what we're talking about today, that's not what this is. The other thing is this. The reason we're talking about it is you talk about money every day. You talk about money sometimes when it comes to inflation. How many of you talked about inflation over the last 3 months? Anybody talked about like gas? I said this last week. Gas ain't free. You know what I mean? Yesterday, just to prove a point, I didn't fill up my gas tank because it cost so much, and I totally could, but I was just mad about it, so I didn't fill it up. I put $25, so now I'm just going to go pay them more money, more times. But anyway, so there's a piece of this. We just talk about money all the time. If you have kids, we said this last week, we buy a lot of diapers. I could own a car that was more than $100 for the amount of diapers that we spend, or money we spend on diapers. That's true. The thing that gets to the heart of it, and this is what we talked about the most last week, is this, that ultimately money comes down to trust, right? And here's the illustration that we give. We won't do it again, but I had everybody take out their wallet last week, which everybody was a little anxious about. I had to hold it up, and I told you this. I was like, if you were going to pass this to the person next to you that you didn't know, or the person behind you that you didn't know, and give them your PIN number, and everybody started laughing as if, please don't make me. And we didn't, obviously, but there's something about this where you go I don't trust you, Phyllis. You know what I mean? There's a little bit that's an office reference. I don't trust you with that. I don't trust you with my money. I don't trust you with my bank account. And some of you are married, and you're like, I trust you most of the time until you're on Amazon, or you're at Target, or at Best Buy. You know what I mean? Whatever that is, I don't trust you there. And because of this is the other part, is we'll follow people that are followers of Jesus a lot, and you'll check this. They'll give a lot of their life over, but not all of it. I can trust you with this. I'll trust you with my marriage. I'll trust you with my kids. I might trust you with my job. When it comes to the finances, I want to be back here. And a lot of people who are followers of Jesus, they give just enough to feel like they're actually being generous without ever actually being generous. And they give just enough, and what this is, to cross off a box to say, I'm engaged in this, but I'm not actually engaged in this. And because money is about trust, we would say this, money is ultimately a spiritual sort of thing. This is a spiritual thing for us. And then I'll finish my recap with the question we asked last week, which is, if you're not trusting Jesus, with your money, are you really trusting Jesus? Are you really trusting Jesus? And here's the answer to that question. The answer to that is almost or ish or mostly, and that's okay to say. I would also say this, if you're not a follower of Jesus in the room, what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes, I don't even think it's for you. So let me just let you off the hook. You can sit there and make fun of all of us, people who are followers of Jesus for the next few minutes, because I think it's for you at some point, but it doesn't make any sense if you haven't given your life to Christ. And I think you should do both of those things, but it doesn't make any sense. But you're going to get a picture over the next few minutes of what Scripture teaches about a principle of giving, and specifically not giving for other people, and not even giving to the church only, those kind of things. But what we find in the Old Testament and what Jesus affirms in the New Testament around generosity when it comes to this. So I'll give you the best illustration that I know how to give to start out. And here's what I'm going to do. How many of you have flown in the last few years? Anybody flown in the last few years? You got a plane? Yeah. How many of you don't like flying? Anybody? Yeah. Wes has flown. Yeah. Anybody? Who doesn't like flying? Anybody doesn't like flying? I am not a fan of flying. It freaks me out. I tell the story. We were going for a job interview when I was in my mid-20s. I was going with Emily. And we're about to get on a plane to fly to Oklahoma. And I get to the edge. Like, if this is when you step on the plane, that moment where you can see all the way down for 4 inches. And I just stopped, and there's 100 people behind us. I was like, I'm not gonna do it. I can't do it. And I'm freaking out. Full on panic attack. Yeah, full on panic attack. And I just went, you go ahead. And so Emily just stepped to the side too, and 100 people go by. Everybody gets on the plane. It's just me and her, and I'm over there, standing there, and I love this. She goes, hey, totally good, but what's the plan? What's the plan? And so I did. I made it on the plane, and now I have a whole system. You seen the AirPod thing, or the big ones that make me look like a DJ, that kind of thing? I own those to fly. That's what I do. I don't want to not hear the engine. I don't want to hear anybody. I want to go into another happy place with John Mayer. So that's what I do. I listen to music, and so now I've got it down. But this: the flight attendants get up, and then they explain everything that's about to happen if something bad goes wrong. You remember this? Which is informative, but I'm also going, if we crash, none of it. And I'm not remembering any of that. I'm going to need a guy like Wes to save the day. That's what I need. But they do this. You heard this when the mask comes down. You guys seen this mask thing? Let me show you this. Yeah, I've never seen one in real life except for the ones that they're holding. But they always say this. You know what they say, right? Where they say, who do you take care of first, right? Yourself, right? So if you got kids, put your mask on yourself, and then on your kids. I always laugh, can you imagine sitting there? I got a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. I'm just if those masks come down and something's actually going on, sure, but I don't know. You know what I mean? It's not great. Then I'll probably do that. And I'll just say this principle, take care. Let's go back one more. Let's go back to the picture. Yeah. I want you to think about this picture real quick. When you think about this picture, this is a principle that we apply in a lot of areas of our lives, right? Take care of yourself first before you pour out. We tell leaders this all the time, right? And it's true. Take care of yourself first. Make sure that you have what you need so that you can pour out of an overflow. That's true. In your marriage, you hear this too. Make sure you're healthy. You got to focus on you in those ways. And so I put this in my notes. Yeah, you can go next. Sorry. It's take care of yourself first, so that you can be prepared. It's always funny, prepared to take care of other people. I think it's a fascinating principle. I think it's true in most places. It's great parenting advice. It's absolutely great parenting advice. It's good relationship advice, right? We actually said this in week 1 of our relationship series. I think we said it like this, make sure that you're the one that you should be before you go out searching for the one, that sort of thing. It's really great leadership advice. I do think it's great leadership advice. The problem is it's just not biblical financial advice. And this is really weird and unnerving, right? This is one of those things where the principle is true in a lot of ways, but it's not really applicable to this, and it's uncomfortable that it's not applicable to this. And it's so uncomfortable that it's not applicable to this that I meet people who are followers of Jesus a lot of times. And here's what they'll do, and you've seen this. They will twist just a little bit, or they'll repackage and package again and package until it gets repackaged and packaged and packaged until it doesn't mean anything, which is kind of funny. Or it will put it fully on the person. It's hey, it's my decision. And I would agree with that. I think it is your decision. We're going to talk about that over the next little bit. But the unsettling question that I did talk about a little bit last week that is true here is, what if God called you to give away more than you were comfortable giving away? Now, the quick answer to this, the Sunday school answer is, well, of course, because I'm going to follow Jesus, all that kind of, which is great, yeah, sure. But if he actually asked me to give away more than I felt comfortable giving away, The real answer to me, and this is true at any point in my life, no matter how much money I've ever made. My first job, I was like very part-time. It's funny, part-time, but I worked like 57 hours a week, and I made $100. It was probably not legal in Tennessee, but we're gonna talk about that. And I just laugh, like, it was hard then. It's hard. It's the highest paying job I've ever had. It's hard at every middle version of this too. If God were to ask me to give more away, it would be hard and it would feel sacrificial. And so what we're gonna talk about for the next few minutes is something that if you've grown up around church, you've heard this phrasing before. It's something that a lot of people don't engage with anymore, and I understand why. We'll talk about that. But the phrase that we're going to talk about the next few minutes is tithing, which is essentially, if I could just like sum it up real fast, tithing is like 10%. And so to give you a backstory to this, what I want to do for the next little bit, and this is where I know it's awkward. Every part of you for the next few minutes is going to go, he's a preacher, so he just wants me to give 10% of my money to the church so that, he can whatever, da-da-da. And there are people that misuse money, they're preachers to totally give that. It frustrates me too. I'm not actually about to ask you that. And I would say if everything in you goes, you know what, you get to the end of this and I feel like God's calling me to give 10% away, but I don't believe in this place. I believe in everything we're going to say, go give 10% somewhere else. Go give it to another church. I do think it's a church thing. Go give it to another church. That's actually great. This is actually something for you. So I would say right off the gate, if there's any part of you that's like a balloon where all this air of angst is in it, let's just pop that at the beginning and go, great. At the end of this, go, hey, if you don't want to give here, go give somewhere. But tithing is one of these principles that I'll hear a lot of saying, and we're going to talk about this. This is an Old Covenant or an Old Testament idea that is not a New Testament principle. So therefore, we don't need to do that. The second part about this that I'll tell you, and this is part of why we're talking about it, is I hear that all the time, and I've actually poked at this a lot. If you've been attending our church for a while, it always makes me a little frustrated. I always get it's always a little bit maddening to me. And I don't know that I always follow it up fully. I don't know if I said this to Marilyn this week. I said it to somebody that was at the church. I was like, a lot of times when churches talk about tithing, it's like, if you just give 10%, then you're good with God. That's actually not at all what the Old Testament or the New Testament principles are around this at all. So a lot of people go, I'm under the New Testament, so I just give what I want. The problem is, the New Testament teaching is so much worse. It's actually so much, so everybody's like, I get to just pick. I'm like, if you read like Acts and you read what they actually did with it, it's not better if you're trying to give less, right? So this is what's fascinating. So what we're going to do for the next few minutes, it's going to be a little different than what we typically do. Usually I stay in one passage and we just go through all that passage. I'm going to take you on a journey through some of the Old Testament and the New Testament and give you history around this, right, for the next little bit. And the reason is because when it comes to generosity and around tithing in particular, generosity is a spiritual discipline like anything else is, right? It actually is. In fact, when you look at the Old Testament and specifically the New Testament, this is like, you get this prayer thing, it's a spiritual discipline, solitude, spiritual discipline, Sabbath is a big one. Sabbath is the closest thing to what we're going to talk about today in terms of principle and like the supernatural side of this that I would go, it doesn't make sense. And it's also one of the most empowering things. And I struggle with Sabbath a lot, right? This is the thing. And then tithe is one of these things too, that is a spiritual discipline that we have. And so to get, again, recalibrated before we jump into the text, the question that we're going to wrestle with first is if we're not trusting Jesus with our money, we're really trusting him. So let's see what the Old Testament and New Testament has to say about it. Now, a little bit of history first. We're looking at Exodus. There's a piece of this where he had all these laws. Most people know about 10 of them, right? It's like don't kill people, honor people, all these kinds of, we know the 10 Commandments, that sort of thing. But there's a lot more laws that were connected to this. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of laws. And a lot of these laws are written in a different culture, which is true. And so you have a lot of agricultural references. You have a lot of these sorts of things. And people, in some ways, weren't making like dollar bills. They weren't making Benjamins in the ways that we talk about it. I don't know why Benjamins, $100 bills, whatever that is. I had to ask which president was on the $100 bill last week. That was fun. Anyway, it wasn't like that, but they had resources that they were given and that they were going to distribute. And so we had this interaction with God and Moses, and it's very awkward at the beginning because it doesn't seem like it's talking about money, but the principle kind of moves through all of it. I would also say I'm not prescribing that we do this now. This was thousands of years ago when people had goats and sheep and animals and all of the things, and this is how they navigated that. So the Lord says to Moses, you get this really interesting idea. It says this. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me, set apart, consecrate to me every firstborn male, we're going to talk a lot about firstborn for the next little bit. Every firstborn male was the animals they were given. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal. So can I just say it right off the gate? It feels like God's needy right off the gate, and it has nothing to do with God. So one of the overarching principles through all of this is if all of it's God's, he can distribute, redistribute however he wants. And I've said this all along the way. It doesn't matter how much you have, right? We are called to be stewards of all of it. And so the principle that you get right out the gate is this. He's saying, I want every firstborn first. This is a consecration. This is ultimately a sacrifice to me. And then you get the second part of this, which is equally as interesting and a little bit different. All the firstborn males of your livestock belong to the Lord. Redeem with a lamb, which was viewed in this way as like a pure sort of sacrifice. Redeem with a lamb every firstborn donkey. But if you don't redeem it, this is where, it's awkward, but break its neck. Woo! Redeem every firstborn among your sons, right? Redeem every firstborn among your sons. Now, there's a piece of this, and the principle around this that we're going to talk about is this, that the clean had to be sacrificed so the unclean could be redeemed. Now, this is a very, I don't want to get too theologically geeky, but the principle you get early on at the very beginning of all of this is that when sin enters into the world, it enters in the beginning, and everything from then on gets tainted in a lot of ways through sin. And I don't have to convince you that you've sinned. Most people, I think we could all agree we've messed some of that up. And so what happens next is there ends up being a sacrificial system to be right with God with the ancient Israelites. And so this is what you're saying. It's like if I got 10 of them, the first one that I have, I'm going to give to the Lord. I'm going to sacrifice, and I'm going to live off of the 9, or I'm going to live off the other ones. This is the principle Old Testament of tithing is around that. I've got this livestock, I've got these resources. I'm going to give one away to the Lord. I'm going to do without 10% of it, and then I'm going to have the other 9. Now, the other part that nobody ever talks about, which we won't hit too hard today, is that was the tithe in this way was one piece of the giving, right? There were actually other ways that people gave. In fact, most people were like, well, the ancient Israelites, they gave away 10%. If you add up all of the different ways that they give, actually it ended up being between 22 and 27% of what they would actually end up giving away of their income. Now, this is what's fascinating, and I don't want you to miss this. It had nothing to do with God needing or that calf or that sheep or that thing. And everything to do with remembering where the source of all of this came from and learning to live off of less to invite the power of God into the rest of it, right? And so this is the principle of this, and there's a bunch of books on this. There's a bunch of guys that write about it. The guy who made it most famous is a guy named Robert Morris. And the principle that he talks around this is this, that God calls us to bring what's first, not what's left. Now, this sounds really, and I'll just tell you, growing up, people would say this to me, and it was easy when I was 10, because I told you last week, my mom, if I got $10, my mom was taking me to the bank. We're getting them in ones, which is always, I needed to give my son 10 $1 bills. We'd do that, and she would we'd take one off, great, and we'd save one of them, and then she would always say, and you get 8 of them. I'm like, all right, Mom. And then I got 100, and it was like, you're going to slice off 10. I was like, what if we sliced off 5? You know what I mean? Like a little bit of that. And then you're going to save, give 10. But the first dollar was the one that was given away. Now, this is something I want you to not miss. Ready? And I'm going to talk about this for a minute. What God required in the Old Testament, that we're going to look at Jesus affirming here in a few minutes. What God required in the Old Testament wasn't that you just gave away 10%. He required you give away the first 10% of what you had. And here's what's so fascinating about it. Please don't miss this part. This was funny. Which means if you gave away the $6th that you had, thanks, but it's not because he needs your money. It's not about the percentage even that way. It's about the first 10%. It's about the cheesy line for it is first fruits. I don't have fruit, but you get it. Like I got 10 apples. You don't get the next. You get the first apple, and then I got 9 of them. And then wisdom, I think, would say, I'm going to take one of those apples, I'm going to save it. And then I've got 8, and this is what Jesus ended up teaching about later, taking the 8 and multiplying the rest for more, right? This is what ends up being so fascinating. So then you go on, you see this principle later on. It goes on. This is Proverbs. Now, they're writing about some of these ancient practices. This is the wisdom literature around it. It says, honor the Lord, which is always fascinating. Honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all of your crops. So again, you got crops. Most of us have seen corn, the fake corn in Dublin, which I think is fast. I don't know who came up with that. Have you seen that? Like somebody sat in a creative meeting and was like, here's what we're going to do in that field. You know what I mean? I think it's fun. Anyway, if that actually means something that I don't know about, email my wife. That's fine. Sorry. But first fruits all your corn. And so they're like, of all of the crops, right, you give the first slice away. Not the second, third, fourth, fifth, 10th, whatever that is. You give the first one away. Then your barns, this is fascinating, will be overflowing and your vats will brim with new wine. So when you give your 10% to the church, you're going to get 100-fold. No, that's not it. That's not it. I've heard preachers use this over and over again. It's nauseating. But there is a promise connected to this, and the promise that's deeply connected to this is you invite the supernatural God or the supernatural working of God into your resources when you follow God's way. And this is an Old Testament principle, and I get this, it's just what you see here. But what you're seeing here is a principle around not slicing off the 6th, 7th, 8th thing, slicing off the first thing you get to this. Now, I would say there are people who can get real legalistic about this. Like, I had a friend one time, like, they just got married. I think it's so cute, but they just got married, and then they bought groceries before they tithed because they would manually tithe. I thought it was so funny. And they took the groceries back, or as many of them would, before they could tithe. I'm like, that ain't it. You get your own groceries, that's fine. But the principle of this, I think, is true. Get your gotta eat. Yeah. But get your in this way of saying, I'm going to take the first section of this and go, and please don't miss this. I'm going to give it to him because it was never mine to begin with. Right? If all of it's God's, he's given you whatever he's given you to steward. And some of you, he's given a lot. Some of you, he's given you a lot. You don't know that he's given you a lot. Some of you, you feel like you struggle in this. And some of it is because of life circumstance, and some of it's because of your own wisdom stuff. And that's okay too. But however this works, whatever you have here, one of my favorite Tim Keller quotes around this, says whatever you have and whatever you're living off of, that's where you make the decision. It does not get easier when you make more money. We said this last week. The people who give the less percentage are the people who make 6 figures or more. That's documented data in the US. People who give the least amount of percentage do it that way. People who give the most is actually the lowest income. And this is so fascinating because percentage doesn't follow you with however much you make. It is a guiding principle about what you do with it. All right, then you get this next one, and we'll look at this next passage. This is Exodus chapter 20, verse 19. It says, now this is the fun part. Bring the best of the first fruits of your soil to the house of the Lord your God. Now, I don't know fully what this is, but I don't want to miss this either. Which means that if you had 10 of those donkey things or sheep things, whatever, if one of them was like, oh, he ain't great, and that's the one you gave, that ain't it. Now, and I don't want you to miss this. That's pretty funny. I don't want you to miss this. Because it's not about the percentage only. It's about how you gave and did you give the best. Now, the word in here that I want you to focus on, and this is probably one of the more fascinating parts, it says bring the best. You don't find in the Old Testament or New Testament the idea of you just giving to God. It is always bringing back to him what was already his. And this is different. This is actually the first principle around all of this, is that it was never yours. I mean, it's yours to steward, but it's never yours. You're like, but I earned it. You did, and you're good. You're so smart. You're really great. And you did, and you worked hard. You did. But where did you get your gifts and talents? Where did you get your wisdom? Where did all of the source of it come from? Right? Come on, don't miss this. Some of you worked your way out, and part of your drive was that I'll never be like my parents. I'll never do what they did, so I'm gonna do better for my kids. All those things are great. And you had a drive. And I tell people who are driven, all these leaders all the time, I'm like, that's great. Can you tell me where you got your drive? And usually it gets connected to a painful experience. Great. But God could have removed you from that experience at the beginning. This is the hard part about this. And he allowed you to experience some of that too. And you're like, And then God turned this in a lot of ways into a blessing with the drive that was already internally in you. And then look what happened. You know, awesome, great. But it's all his. And you want to know how it's all his? Because you've seen people who have more zeros. You get tired of counting the zeros, right? They lost it all. And it wasn't anything they necessarily did. Something happened that was out of their control. And you go, well, is that punishment? I don't think that was punishment. I think that's just living sometimes. But it was never yours. And as much as you try to keep it, you can never fully and finally keep it safe. I put it in my notes, I said it this way. I said, you can't give something that doesn't belong to you. You can only bring it back to the owner. And this is what Jesus teaches in the New Testament. He does is like bury the talents, and one guy buries it, one guy turns it into more, and the next guy turns it into a lot more. And you go, look. But whose money was it originally? And whose money is it still? It's his. This has never been a gift. Please don't miss it. It's never been a gift to God. You're bringing him what was his first. Now, I'm going to give you a great example of this. Now, if you look in the Old Testament, you have like the Cain and Abel narrative, the story. It's always funny. A lot of people don't talk about this. I think it's always so fascinating. Why was one of the offerings accepted while the other one wasn't? I think it's always a fascinating thing. I want to read it to you. You'll see it in the midst of the text. This is Genesis chapter 4. It says, in the course of time, Cain brought, can we say that together? Cain brought some of the fruits, right? He brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, which I think is funny, fat portions from some of the, what's the next word? Firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked, and this is hard to read. The Lord looked with favor. He looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look with his favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. And you know why his face was downcast? Well, I'm so angry that you're looking at me like this. And God's going, he brought the first. And there's a favor that's attached to that. You go like, God doesn't do that. I think God stuff the world with principle-based things a lot. And when you follow those principles, it's not like your life is the best life you've ever had and everything's, you're never going to have pain, because that's just crap. But at the end of the day, what you do see and experience is this. When you follow what God wants us to do, he gets involved in it. And not always the way that we want, but he gets involved in that stuff. So the question is like, why did God reject Cain's offering and accept Abel's offering? I don't know, but we see the principle, right? And this is the principle of the first throughout all of it. In the guts of this is a principle of what came to me first, I'm going to give back to you first before I engage with the rest. And so here's the honest question, you ready? And this is the one that I hope bothers you. So this is the one I hope keeps you up tonight around 3 a.m. All right. If Jesus told you to return the first to him or to God, would you do it? And not, I know the answer and so I would. But if Jesus sat down with you, I want to say Outback, but I don't think you and Jesus are going to Outback. But wherever y'all going to go, y'all going to go boozy. I don't know, wherever you go. And you sit down and he said, I want the first, like deep down. How hard would it be for you to do that? And here's how you know how hard it would be. Ready? The amount of angst you currently feel thinking about giving away 10% or more of your income away is the amount of angst that you would still feel in that moment. Because there's something, and me too, 100% me, going like, nope. I said this last week. I'll do a little bit of open hands, but not all of it. I might even do a smidge more. I'm going to feel great about it because I know I'm giving more than that guy. Ooh, I know that, I feel pretty good. He doesn't even cuss. There's a little bit of that. You feel pretty good about yourself. But there's a little bit of like, but are you doing this? Is it actual obedience? All right, I'm going to show you another text, and I'm walking you through a bunch of it. Here's another one. This is Matthew 23. Now, actually, can we go back? I actually don't want to read it yet. Yeah, sorry. I'm going to tell you this. So the big push I get on this a lot is this. But this is an Old Testament principle, doesn't apply to the New Testament. So let me just tell you real quick. You don't see it talked about a ton in the New Testament. Well, you see talked about, with Paul talking about this a lot, or even with the early disciples, this sort of thing. What you find is generosity in general, and they pooled their resources together to do extraordinarily massive, generous things. The assumption in the Jewish culture, though, was that this was still in existence. And so what you find is where people push back, and I'll tell you why they push back in a second. You get Jesus who talks about this one particular time. He's talking about 1/10 of the tithe. And what happens is he elevates another section to a group of people who had checked all the boxes, including tithing, right? So he's teaching to the Pharisees, he's calling them all out, which is always fun. If you want really fun Bible reading, read Jesus talking to the Pharisees. It's just fun. Wow, he's like that a lot. So there's that. but he doesn't negate it. And this is what people, I think, miss when Jesus teaches this. Here's what he says. He goes, woe to you, teachers of the law and the Pharisees, you hypocrites. Ooh. He says, you give a tenth tithe of your spices. You give a tenth away of what your resources are. And he lists some mint, dill, and cumin. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And you should have practiced the latter, don't miss this, without neglecting the former. Now, what most people are quoting when they talk about this verse is like everything up until this, right? We stop here. Like, hey, look, what really matters is justice. Yeah. Oh, come on, what really matters is mercy and faithfulness. Absolutely. What really matters is my heart. You know, is my heart in this? Well, yeah. Yeah, but I put it in my mind, this way. Jesus could have said this, like, God doesn't care about your money. He just wants your heart. He just wants the mercy, the justice, faithfulness, which is true. He wants that, and that might even be more elevated. But at the end of the day, he wants all of it. He still wants the tithe. He wasn't negating that. He was saying that both exist. Let me give you an example. My friend Josh Howerton has one of my favorite examples around this. It's a little bit awkward, but it's great. It's kind of like saying this. When you attended church today, this is great. I could look at you and say, look, I want you to come dressed. What does that mean to come dressed? Well, I want you to make sure, you have your shirt on and socks and shoes. All those things would be great. Yeah. But if you don't wear your pants, you're going to jail. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit of that. It's not one or the other. It's not, you know what, I really want you to have your shirt on. Absolutely. Yeah, I really would love, shoes. I mean, that'd be great too. Fantastic. Yeah, all this. But I don't know about this one. No. I want you fully dressed. The whole gamut, please. It's not negating the other. It's a both and. Now don't miss this. Jesus affirms the tithing thing as a base. It's as a base for all of this. Now, I put it in my notes, and we're going to wrap up in a second. It says, if God isn't first in all of this, if God's not first in your finances, he's not actually first in your life. Because the finances are connected to, don't miss it, everything else. And I said this last week, it's the one thing you can hide and nobody will ever know. It's the one thing that you can keep back here, no. It's the one thing that you could go, like, you get this, and you can do all the right things and do this. And nobody would ever know, except for him. But what many of us are doing, now please don't miss this, me included, there have been seasons of my life where I've absolutely done this too, is I go, I trust you with this, and this. I do not trust you with this because I don't know what you would ask. And if you ask, I don't know if I could do it, or I don't know if I'll get what I want and will I be taken care of. Now, one of my favorite quotes around this, and again, if I can convince everybody's a follower of Jesus, those of you who aren't, this is not really for you, but because every follower of Jesus is this. Some of you don't feel like you can afford to do this, or I would say you've been running a long time in your life without the favor and blessing of God over this particular area, right? I'm just going to tell you, I love this quote. It's not mine, but you can't afford not to for many people. And you have no idea what comes on the other side of it. And it may not be a massive bank account that gets full. I don't know that it's that. I don't know that it's that you get more money. I don't know that it's that. But I can tell you that people who apply this principle first and then go forward, I'm just telling you, something happens in their lives financially. And it doesn't always mean bigger car. It doesn't always mean bigger house. It doesn't always mean more money. There's something that happens in the heart. And the principle around this, I can just be really clear on, is this, right? Return the first to God, and the rest is blessed and redeemed. This goes all the way back to the beginning. This is a principle that follows all the way through. Now, can I tell you how you already know this if you're a follower of Jesus? I'm just going to tell you. You apply this in your relationships already. You apply this in your marriage already. Right? You do. What God teaches around relationships, what God teaches around sex, what God teaches around these sort of things, followers of Jesus, you know this. You've been applying Jesus' teaching on these ethics for a long time in your life, expecting him to bless what you're doing. But this one we don't. Many of us don't. There's been seasons where I don't. And I'm just going to tell you, come on, you know this. You expect God's blessing here and you work to follow it in obedience. But we don't here, And then we want him to miraculously turn. I'm just going to tell you. Come on, you know this. The blessing of God, not in some like a pick you and not you, not necessarily that, but that, and the power of this, the invitation for God to get involved in this particular area of my life requires us to do it his way. My friend Josh said it this way. I think it's so good. In fact, I read it. I wrote it down. I should have put his name on it. So just pretend it says Josh Howard, and that would be great. He said it this way. You can't ignore the priorities of Jesus and look for the provision of God. Those two things don't work. You can't ignore the priorities of Jesus and look for the provision of God. And please hear me. Can you look at me? Some of you right now are arguing, well, he just wants my money. I'll come back to what I said in the beginning. Apply the principle, give it to another church. I'll give you a list of churches you can give it to. Great. Even if you don't do it here, great. But do it. But do it. Do something when it comes to this. I'm gonna trust you. I'm gonna follow you. Set aside an amount of time. I've been to churches where I always think it's a little bit cheesy. I don't know if we would do this. They're like, we're gonna challenge you to do it for 90 days, and if we're gonna give it back to you. I'd probably just give it back to you if you asked anyway. But I'd say, just try it. Try it. Take a step of obedience and trust him. Do that. But I'm just going to tell you this, and it's because I really do. I want something for you. It's not about the amount. It's really not. It involves the percentage, and can I just tell you, I don't know why. I would have picked higher than 10 if I were God. 60 sounds good to me. I don't know. Like, if I were going to do it, it'd be higher. But I was going to say, it's just, the 10th is just talked about. I've been at Bible college. I've studied this stuff a lot. I don't know why. I mean, I get like the ethereal reason. I don't know. But like a 10th is talked about. I think you should try it with a 10th first. And then some of you, now can I just say though, principally it's not about just the percentage. I'll tell you this. Some of you give away 10% and you don't even blink. And this is the rest of the New Testament stuff on it. It's going, it's sacrificial giving, and to what degree do you trust God? I'll tell you what we are trying to do in our life. And it's not easy. It's not easy with 3 kids, just to be really honest. It's not easy. We're trying to increase every year the percentage that we give away. And I'll just tell you, when we do, and this is just us, I'm not saying you need it, but I'm just saying when we do, I never don't feel like, oh, I don't. There's not this like, oh, thank you, Jesus, for all of that. It's not that. It's just, I feel the sacrificial thing, and it's not because my bank account then refills. It's not that. But I'm just telling you, there's something about trusting God in this like you would trust him in anything else that you need to do. And so here's kind of the action steps around this. And then I'm going to pray, and I'm going to dismiss you. We're not even going to pass a bucket. Well, we don't even pass buckets, but that'd be fun. All right, here's it. Right? Spiritual discipline of tithing says this. You give from the first, not what's left. Some of you, this needs to be the first thing you apply. Right? You're not waiting until all the bills are paid. You're saying, I'm going to give you what's first. I'm going to do that first. Second one is this. This is something we try to do, is you automate what's important. I automate my bills. I just do, right? I don't think everybody does that. I automate it. It comes out, I don't want to see it. I automate it. I think it's the best way to do it. And now we get to, right? My mom back in the day had to, you know what checks are? Y'all ever heard of checks? Yeah. Just kidding. And we'd write out a check, or we'd get cash out, and I'd give it as a kid. Like I was going to say, you can automate what's important. Automate what's important as your heart. And the last one is this, and this is the big step for many of us. This is an act of faith. It's an act of faith in the way that anything else you do like this is an act of faith. And so here's what I'm going to ask. That's what I'm going to ask of you, right? Give it here, give it somewhere else. However you do it. I mean that. I really do. But however you do it, I want you to trust God in this area of your life. Because until you do, every other part of your life will be affected by this. You have given partially a piece of your life to Jesus, but not all of it. And you will never experience the fullness of following him until you follow him in all of it. Let me pray for us. Father, we thank you for this principle. Thank you. That's true. We thank you that you are calling us into the first parts of this, and not because you need our money, because you don't. And not because there's some wild, dream vacation car house thing at the end of this, because that's really not what you promised us either. God, you want us. You want us to trust you. You call us to take these steps of faith. And every time we do, you show yourself faithful. So I pray for the person right now who's here. And I know what this is like. We've walked through these seasons in our home and growing up too, where they go, I don't even know how to do, I can't even figure out how that's done. And for them, it feels like a massive faith step. And I pray that you would do it. And then especially for those people, I just ask that you would beyond naturally, supernaturally show up in their lives when it comes to their finances, and that the next faith step that they take doesn't feel easier because it won't be easier. They'll have more confidence in you to take it. Pray for the person in the room who's kind of like, hey, we're doing all right. Like, it's not great, it's not bad, but we're doing all right. And they're kind of what I talked about earlier when it came to giving, of like, I'm giving you some, but not all, and I'm kind of trusting you, but not really. And at the end of the day, what they've done, they wouldn't say this out loud, but they've rationalized partial obedience. And I know what that's like too. And I ask that you would just help them to trust you and to fully obey. And then I pray for the people in the room who are abnormally wealthy. They know they are. I mean, they know that. And you've blessed them so much, so much. And they're here, and at the end of the day, it's not a need thing. It's not even a want thing. It's like in their heart, it's theirs. And whatever you've got to do to break that in their hearts, to remind them that they are stewards of your resources, and that you have blessed them and given them a spiritual gift in this. God, I pray that they would just open their hands and open their hearts and follow you. And then I pray that you would continue to fill that over and over again in their hearts and their lives so that they can do even more. We love you and we thank you. We trust you with it. In Jesus' name we pray.